Have you ever wondered who the old security guard holding the door for you every morning truly is? In a world where power is measured by the price of a suit, Ethan, the billionaire chairman of $1 trillion empire, made a radical choice to strip it all away and become invisible. But when an arrogant executive hurls a leather glove into his face, a cold, calculated purge begins. This isn't just about money, it's a relentless hunt for the chilling truth behind his father's death, a secret buried for 15 long years. Do you have the courage to follow this journey to the end and witness a revelation that will shake the very foundations of Silicon Valley? Don't look away, because the truth will leave you speechless. Thousands of people walk past him every day, never realizing that the man in the faded uniform actually owned the entire skyscraper. The New York sky was gray and biting cold as Ethan stood guard at the revolving doors of Sterling Technologies. At 45 years old, Ethan possessed the piercing blue eyes of a corporate titan, but today they were hidden behind a pair of cheap glasses. He wore a threadbare security uniform, holding a worn plastic baton. Just 1 week ago, Ethan sat in the boardroom on the 86th floor, making decisions that changed the lives of millions. But today, he was invisible. At 8:45 in the morning, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb. Julian, the newly appointed CEO, stepped out with unbearable arrogance. He was draped in a $12,000 suit, walking as if he owned the very earth beneath his feet. As Julian approached the entrance, Ethan held the door and bowed politely. But instead of walking through, Julian stopped, staring intensely at a tiny water spot on his polished leather shoes. Julian barked, demanding to know what idiot left water on the floor to ruin his footwear. He had no clue the man standing before him was the one who signed his appointment letter. Ethan calmly replied that the floors had just been mopped and offered his apologies. But Julian wouldn't stop. He ripped off his leather glove, threw it directly into Ethan's face, and ordered him to get on his knees and wipe the shoes clean immediately, or be fired within 5 minutes. Around them, young employees hurried past with their heads down, too afraid to speak up for the old guard. Ethan felt the chilling silence of the crowd. He looked directly into Julian's eyes, without a trace of fear. In Ethan's mind, a purge had already begun. He knew this empire was rotting from the inside because of men like Julian. Just then, Sarah, the senior executive secretary, rushed over with a stack of documents. She froze at the scene. Julian smirked, telling Sarah to call HR and get rid of this piece of trash security guard. But Sarah wasn't looking at Julian. She was staring at the simple silver ring on Ethan's left hand, a keepsake known only to the chairman's inner circle. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the terrifying truth began to dawn on her. A heavy silence filled the main lobby as Julian waited for a submissive kneel, but all he received was a faint, mysterious smile. Ethan didn't kneel. He slowly picked up the leather glove, dusted it off, and handed it back to Julian with a calmness that was utterly terrifying. He looked straight into the young CEO's eyes and said that his shoe wasn't worth anyone's dignity, not even a security guard's. Julian's rage exploded like a volcano. He screamed that Ethan was officially fired and demanded that security throw him out of the building immediately. However, Sarah managed to regain her composure. Trembling, she stopped Julian, claiming there was a clerical error in the guard's file that needed to be checked at the chairman's office first. Julian didn't care. He snapped at Sarah and stormed into the VIP elevator to prepare for the most important board meeting of the year. He had no idea that the master key in Ethan's pocket had just been activated to lock down his entire digital existence. 15 minutes later, in the boardroom on the 86th floor, Julian sat at the head of the table with smug confidence. He began his presentation on mass layoffs to maximize profits. But the moment he pressed the start button, the giant screen didn't show charts. Instead, a single line of bright red text appeared. Access denied. Every key card, every corporate bank account, and all of Julian's executive powers had been frozen in an instant. The room erupted into whispers. Julian slammed his hand on the table in a panic, barking orders at the tech department to fix it. Just then, his phone buzzed with a notification from his bank. His personal account, with a balance of $6 million, had been locked pending an investigation into its source. Cold sweat began to pour down Julian's forehead. He looked toward the door and saw Ethan, still in his security uniform, leaning against the frame with eyes as cold as a razor blade. Ethan strolled into the boardroom to the absolute shock of every shareholder. Julian was about to rush forward with insults, but Sarah stepped ahead. She bowed as low as possible and solemnly announced to the entire board that the true chairman of Sterling Technologies had returned. The air in the room turned thick, and Julian's breath caught in his throat as he realized the man he had just thrown a glove at was the very person who could erase his career with a single flick of a finger. The sound of the leather glove hitting the floor this morning still echoed in the room, but now the one trembling wasn't the old guard. It was the CEO who had just lost everything. Julian stood frozen, his face as pale as a ghost, as he watched the entire board of directors stand and bow in unison toward Ethan. He stammered, trying to explain that this must be a sick joke or a catastrophic mistake. Julian approached Ethan, his voice shaking, pleading with him to stop the act and tell him that Sarah was just playing a prank. But Ethan didn't say a word. He simply walked to the head of the table where Julian had been sitting and slowly turned the silver ring on his finger. Ethan's gaze swept across the room, forcing those who had sided with Julian to look down in shame. He opened a red folder on the table and tossed it toward Julian. It wasn't an employee file. It was detailed evidence of 12 shady transactions Julian had made over the last 3 months. A total of $8.4 million had been funneled to ghost accounts in the Virgin Islands. Julian felt the ground beneath him crumble as he realized the guard he despised had been tracking his every move for a long time. Ethan finally spoke, his voice deep and powerful like thunder. He told Julian that he wasn't just immoral for how he treated his staff, but a professional thief who was destroying the hard work of tens of thousands of employees. Julian collapsed to his knees, the expensive leather shoes he was so proud of now touching the very floor he had forced others to kneel on. He sobbed, begging for a second chance, promising to return every cent and do whatever Ethan asked. But Ethan only looked down at the man at his feet with pure disgust. He declared that Sterling Technologies had no room for those who disrespected human dignity and betrayed trust. Immediately, 2 real security officers entered the room. Julian screamed as he was dragged away, but the sound was quickly muffled by the heavy oak doors. Ethan sighed, looking out the window overlooking all of New York City, and told Sarah that the purge had only just begun at the very top. The heavy doors closing behind Julian marked the start of a new chapter. A chapter where power was no longer measured by expensive suits, but by hidden kindness. After Julian was escorted away, the atmosphere in the 86th floor boardroom remained thick with fear. Ethan slowly peeled off his faded blue security jacket, revealing a pristine white shirt underneath. He didn't sit in the powerful chairman's seat. Instead, he walked around the table, looking into the eyes of every shareholder. He told them that his week in a security uniform had shown him things a chairman sitting at the top would never see: the arrogance of management and the fear of dedicated employees. Ethan ordered Sarah to display the list of employees who had laughed or looked away when Julian humiliated him this morning. Without any shouting, Ethan simply asked HR to prepare severance packages for them. He believed that someone who couldn't respect a security guard could never truly respect a client or a partner. Right then, Ethan asked Sarah to call the ground floor reception and ask for Marcus, the youngest guard, the only one who had secretly handed him a bottle of water and a sandwich while he stood guard in the New York cold. Minutes later, Marcus entered the boardroom, looking timid and anxious. He couldn't understand why he had been summoned to the highest floor. When he saw Ethan, Marcus was so stunned he nearly dropped his uniform cap. Ethan smiled, walked over, and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. He announced to the entire board that starting today, Marcus would be sent to management school and become the chairman's direct intern assistant. Ethan wanted to prove that at Sterling Technologies, attitude and kindness were the most valuable assets. The giant screen changed once more, displaying a plan to restructure the welfare fund for all entry-level employees. Ethan decided to use the $8.4 million recovered from Julian's fraudulent accounts to establish a scholarship fund for the children of janitors and security guards. Sarah looked at Ethan with deep admiration. She understood that her chairman hadn't just returned for revenge. He had returned to reignite the flame of humanity that was fading in this trillion-dollar empire. A cornered beast will always show its claws, and Julian was no exception when he decided to use lies to burn down Ethan's empire. Less than 24 hours after being kicked out of Sterling Technologies, Julian played his final card. A sophisticatedly edited video flooded social media, portraying Ethan as a twisted chairman who abused his power by posing as a guard just to stalk and humiliate his employees. New York media exploded. Sensational headlines about the eccentric chairman appeared on every front page. The corporation's stock price began a free fall, evaporating over $10 billion in a single morning. Inside the chairman's office, shareholders were in a state of total panic. They demanded Ethan's immediate resignation to calm public outrage. Even Sarah was worried as she watched thousands of people protesting at the building gates, calling for a boycott of Sterling Technologies. Julian, from a secret apartment, watched the chaos on TV with triumph. He had partnered with a rival corporation to execute a hostile takeover as soon as the stock price hit rock bottom. He believed he had won. But Ethan just sat there, sipping black coffee with strange composure. He looked at the bleeding red stock market charts and smiled. Ethan knew that to catch a big fish, you had to use the biggest bait. He asked Marcus, his new assistant, to bring him a memory card hidden inside an old desk lamp in the security room. It contained the original, unedited footage of Julian forcing Ethan to kneel, along with secret recordings of Julian's conversations with rivals about selling out tech secrets. Ethan was in no rush to release the evidence. He waited until Julian and his team of lawyers marched arrogantly into the building lobby with an emergency board meeting summons. Julian laughed, declaring that Ethan was finished. But at that exact moment, every giant billboard in Times Square and every TV in the building broadcasted the original footage simultaneously. The raw truth was exposed to millions. Ethan stood on the balcony looking down, his eyes as cold as a judge sentencing a man who had betrayed his own home. As the truth was laid bare under the brilliant lights of Times Square, Julian's lies vanished like mist before the dawn, leaving him stranded in the middle of the storm he had created. Julian stood frozen in the lobby, the summons in his hand slipping to the floor as he watched his own face on the giant screen spewing filth. He turned to flee, but the glass doors of Sterling Technologies were already deadlocked. Police sirens wailed outside, drowning out the crowd's transition from rage to shock. Detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit marched in, holding emergency arrest warrants for financial fraud and corporate espionage. Ethan stepped out of the VIP elevator, his face showing no joy, only the gravity of a man delivering justice. He walked past the handcuffed Julian without stopping for a single second. Ethan headed straight for a middle-aged man cowering in a dark corner of the lobby. Arthur, the chairman of a rival corporation and the puppet master behind Julian. Ethan handed Arthur a tablet displaying data that Sterling Technologies had acquired over 60% of the rival's shares in the 15 minutes their stock fluctuated. Arthur turned pale, realizing his hostile takeover attempt had been turned into corporate suicide by Ethan. Ethan remarked that in business, those who use dirty tactics will always be drowned by their own filth. As Julian was escorted to the police car in front of hundreds of media lenses, Ethan announced to the public that all stock losses would be covered by his personal reserve fund to protect small shareholders. At the end of a long, turbulent day, Ethan returned to the ground floor security room. He took off his luxury suit, put back on his old security jacket, and sat on a plastic chair with Marcus. He told Marcus that regardless of one's position, keeping your heart standing tall is the hardest part. Sarah walked in with 2 cups of hot coffee, smiling as she saw the trillion-dollar chairman and his young assistant looking out at the rushing New York City crowds, who now knew exactly who kept the lights of this building burning bright. The storm had passed, but what remained was not ruins. It was the seeds of a new faith that had begun to bloom. A month after the earth-shaking events at Sterling Technologies, the building was no longer a symbol of cold, extreme luxury. Ethan chose not to return to the 86th floor office immediately. Instead, he spent every Monday morning with Marcus, checking security posts and cleaning areas. He kept his promise. The Guardian Scholarship Fund had already helped over 200 children of entry-level staff attend school. The building was now filled with sincere smiles and greetings, no longer the bowed heads of fear. Julian and Arthur were facing long prison sentences, but Ethan no longer spared them a thought. To him, the greatest revenge wasn't sending them to jail. It was proving that a business could thrive through kindness. Sarah approached Ethan as he stood at the reception desk, handing him a plan to expand the corporation into green technology. She smiled, noting that since his time as a guard, the company's value had doubled, not because of numbers, but because of the absolute loyalty of the staff. Ethan looked out through the revolving doors where sunlight danced on the New York sidewalks. He knew he was still the same man, whether in an expensive suit or a security uniform. He turned toward the camera as if speaking directly to every viewer. Status is temporary, but character is forever. Julian had been led away in disgrace, but the darkness surrounding Sterling Technologies had not yet fully vanished. In a cold interrogation room, Arthur, the mastermind behind Julian, stared at Ethan through the one-way glass with a cryptic smile. He demanded to see Ethan one last time. When they were alone, Arthur whispered a secret that made Ethan's heart stop. "You think your father died in an accident, Ethan? Take a closer look at Project Helios, the mission he pursued 15 years ago." Arthur revealed that his father's death wasn't a highway mishap, but a staged assassination orchestrated by a shadow organization to seize the source code for a clean energy technology that could change the world. Ethan felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. Rage and grief struck him simultaneously. Project Helios, his father's lifelong passion, had been stolen and dismantled to serve the greed of ruthless conglomerates. Arthur claimed the true leader wasn't him, but a powerful figure in Silicon Valley, hiding behind the mask of a great philanthropist. Ethan realized this war now extended far beyond the boundaries of a single corporation. This was no longer about reclaiming a chairman's seat. It was a hunt for the truth, for his late father. He swore that his father's soul would not wait for justice another minute. To infiltrate this organization, Ethan knew he had to shed his glamorous identity once more. He looked at the security uniform hanging on the rack. It was no longer a trap to test hearts, but the armor he needed to enter the lion's den. Ethan decided to vanish from the high society world once again. This time, the setting wasn't the luxurious halls of Sterling, but a high-tech data facility belonging to Apex Corporation, the place believed to hold the final piece of Project Helios. Ethan posed as a technical maintenance worker, a silent man with a face smeared with machine oil. Marcus, his fiercely loyal young assistant, was tasked with remote coordination. Through the security cameras, Marcus watched Ethan slip past security lasers with the agility of a ghost. Here, Ethan witnessed the cruelty of power firsthand. Apex was using his father's technology not to save the planet, but to control the global energy supply, forcing poor nations into dependency. Ethan infiltrated the core server room, which contained the secrets of the leader of the syndicate. While copying the data, the alarm suddenly blared. The heavy footsteps of armed security closed in fast. Ethan had only 30 seconds to escape. On the thin line between life and death, he remembered his days standing guard in the rain. Patience and meticulous observation saved him. He found a narrow ventilation duct and vanished just as the steel door was breached. In his hand, he now held the ironclad evidence to topple this entire dark empire. Ethan knew the enemy was beginning to fear, for the invisible man they despised most was the one holding their death warrant. The final confrontation took place at Apex's headquarters in Silicon Valley. The leader revealed himself as Thomas Vance, the man who was once Ethan's father's closest partner. Thomas stood on the top floor of the glass tower, looking down at the city with the eyes of a god. He showed no remorse, even arrogantly declaring that the world needed dictators like him to maintain order. Thomas ordered his agents to surround Ethan, threatening to wipe all data and destroy him if he didn't surrender the final encryption key for Project Helios. But Thomas underestimated one thing. Ethan wasn't fighting alone. While Thomas was drunk on power, Marcus and Sarah activated a massive cyber attack, broadcasting all evidence of Apex's crimes onto every global media platform. The shocked faces of millions watching the live stream became Ethan's strongest weapon. Thomas's agents began to lower their weapons as they realized they were protecting a murderer. Thomas panicked, trying to erase the evidence, but the system had been locked by Ethan using a security protocol known only to his father. "True power doesn't lie in control, Thomas," Ethan said, his voice echoing through the room. "It lies in the truth." Federal agents swarmed in, ending the traitor's reign. Ethan stood there, watching the code of Project Helios be released as a public asset for humanity, just as his father had intended 15 years ago. After the fall of Apex, Ethan became a hero in the tech world. Sterling Technologies now held the key to limitless clean energy, skyrocketing the corporation's value to unprecedented heights. Shareholders and world tycoons surrounded Ethan, inviting him to join a secret council, one that could shape the destiny of nations. They promised him absolute power, standing above all laws. This was the greatest temptation Ethan had ever faced, the chance to become the true ruler of the world, legitimate and authoritative. That night, Ethan stood alone in his lavish office, looking down at the brilliant lights of New York. In his hands, he held his father's silver ring and his old security uniform. On one side was limitless power. On the other was the humility of an anonymous man. Ethan realized that if he accepted the invitation, he would be no different from Thomas or Julian, men blinded by power. He understood that the purpose of Project Helios was to liberate people, not to enslave them. The next morning, to the shock of the financial world, Ethan announced his resignation as chairman and handed over leadership to Marcus and Sarah. He decided to turn Sterling Technologies into a nonprofit organization, providing free clean energy to impoverished regions. Ethan chose to leave the pinnacle of power to return to his core values, a free heart. He knew that a true legacy is not an empire, but the kindness he had sown throughout his grueling journey. Years later, at a small suburban school, a middle-aged man in simple clothes is quietly repairing solar panels for the children. No one recognizes him as the legendary billionaire Ethan. Marcus, now a brilliant leader, still visits his mentor from time to time. They sit together, not discussing stock prices or markets, but talking about the children who just received scholarships from the Guardian Fund. Ethan watches the green seedlings stretching toward the sun and smiles with deep contentment. Ethan's story isn't just about revenge or power. It's a living testament to human value. The most profound moral lesson we've learned is this: social status is merely a coat. What truly defines us is how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return. A truly great person is not the one standing at the top looking down, but the one willing to humble themselves to lift others up. Never let power blind you, and never look down on anyone, for the anonymous guard today might hold the key to your future tomorrow. Ethan's journey has come to an end, but yours is just beginning. If this story has given you a new perspective on life, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Untold Journey Stories. Leave a comment below about the lesson that resonated with you the most. Your support is the fuel that keeps us telling stories that change the world. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next journey.